Hello, genealogists. This is Craig, and this is Just Genealogy. And today we're going to cover Chapter 9, Commercial Firms of Genealogy as a Pastime and Profession by Donald Lines Jacobus. Chapter 9, Commercial Firms. Half the truth is often a great lie. Benjamin Franklin. With the great growth of interest in the subject of ancestry, it is not surprisingly that some commercial houses were attracted to the field of genealogy as a possible source of profit. The question is pertinent: when does genealogy cease to be a profession and become merely a business? The genealogist, like any professional man, takes a genuine pride in his work. Anything that he puts in print must be made as accurate as possible, and he would scorn to copy and reprint data from other books without investigation of the reliability of the books used, or if necessary, an independent investigation in original record sources. As with other professional men, there is a personal relation between the genealogist and his client, and he feels a responsibility to give his client nothing but accurate information. He charges a fee for services which his ability, training, and experience enable him to render. In making this distinction between the professional genealogist and commercial houses, the difference of attitude is the essential thing. The commercial house does not feel the same sense of personal responsibility to the client. The emphasis is on giving the client what he wants rather than on giving him the truth and nothing but the truth. If professional genealogists are sometimes found to be hostile towards the commercial firms, it is because the latter have lowered genealogical standards and helped to render conditions in the profession even less satisfactory than they were. A client who has employed either an incompetent genealogist or a commercial firm, and who afterwards learns of gross inaccuracies in the data paid for, naturally forms a low opinion of the genealogical profession as a whole. Most of the commercial organizations that have entered the genealogical field have been publishing houses. Some of these specialized in genealogical printing, and when they did not get enough family histories to publish for compilers of such works, it is natural that they should seek to stimulate the business by doing publishing on their own account. One of the earliest, and incidentally one of the best of the publishing firms to evolve such a scheme, was Joel Munsell's Sons of Albany, New York. By 1900, Munsell's Index to American Genealogists had run through 5 editions. This useful work, though now far out of date in view of all that has been published since 1900, and there's an asterisk to a footnote, Munsell's Index and the supplement 1900-1908 have been reprinted by Genealogical Publishing Company of Baltimore. The present writer carried on this type of work by publishing 3 volumes of genealogical periodical indexes up to 1953, asterisk. This 3-volume index of genealogical periodicals, originally published in 1932, 1948, and 1953, has been reprinted by Genealogical Publishing Company of Baltimore, and this work has been carried on by others. Munsell's also brought out a series of books under the title American Ancestry, which sold well and must have been a profitable undertaking. People were invited to send their own family lines for publication, and I believe the charge was made for inclusion, or at least those included subscribed for copies of the book. Of course, no publication of this type can claim to be authoritative. It is bound to be unequal in merit since the material is furnished by a large number of people. Some of this material shows evidence of much research and careful compilation, while some of it is decidedly lower standard. Double asterisk. This 12-volume set, originally published from 1887 to 1898, has been reprinted by Genealogical Publishing Company of Baltimore. A decade later, a New York City firm was in the field with a somewhat more ambitious scheme. The North Atlantic states were divided into zones, and 3 or 4-volume genealogical histories issued for each zone. Agents approached those who had achieved prominence of any kind in their respective communities and sold them the idea of including their family lines in these books. The opportunity was given them also of writing what they pleased about their own careers, and this must have been an excellent selling point, where every man would like to be his own biographer. These books had wide circulation and are among the first books to be consulted by novices, and I regret to say by some of the less experienced professional genealogists. Although each set published has an editorial staff, the price charged for inclusion was insufficient to enable the staff to spend much time on original research. Much valuable material was printed where the person furnished it had research done by experts, but where it had been left to the editorial staff to furnish the ancestry, There was too much dependence on inferior printed sources and even downright guessing. Another New York house specialized in coats of arms and issued very handsome books for private clients. Very little original research was done, and the genealogical material printed was often untrustworthy. Emphasis was usually placed on noble English families of the same surname, despite the lack of connection with the American family, and rarely was any evidence presented for the right of the American family to use the coat of arms, which in gorgeous colors faced the reading material. A competent professional can recognize a book of this type at a glance and know he cannot trust the genealogical data in it without independent verification. All books of this type have some genealogical value and a proper sphere of usefulness. It can usually be taken for granted that the information about present-day descendants and their parents and grandparents is correct, and the writer of a family history is interested in all of the certain family name can thus, like Samson, find honey in a lion's skull. The same observation applies to many town and county histories, which often contain biographies and genealogical sketches derived from many sources and too often are not safe to follow so far as the earlier generations are concerned. A publishing house located in another metropolis evolved a different scheme for drawing dividends from genealogy. Common surnames were selected and books published, one to each surname purporting to be family histories. The printed census records, printed war rolls, genealogies, and town histories, and many other printed works were combed for mention of each surname, and the resulting hodgepodge was called a family history. These books were labeled source material from printed authorities on the Smiths, Jones, or Robinson family. Nobody could criticize adversely a publication of this type, for it does bring together into one volume what can be found in scattered printed sources and made it readily accessible to those living far from the large public libraries. Oftentimes, valuable information or clues at least can be found in a book of this type, but it is misleading to call it a family history, for a book cannot justly lay claim to being either comprehensive or authentic. In 1930, this organization was closed by the Post Office Department for false and fraudulent promises. In Chicago, 7 volumes were published, the first in 1925, of a work called The Abridged Compendium of American Genealogy. This work belongs to the same genre as American Ancestry, mentioned above. It is different from it being more comprehensive, more condensed, and less lucid in arrangement. It presented pedigrees of a large number of people on one or more lines from their first American ancestors. Like other publications of similar type, the compendium was of unequal merit depending on the source of the material printed. Some of those who furnished their data had looked up their ancestry with care and employed genealogists to do so. Unquestionably, others furnished much less trustworthy data, and where their personal knowledge was slight, the editorial staff supplied the deficiency by using such printed sources as were available. As no references are given, the users of the compendium cannot determine how authentic any specific statement is, and because of the high proportion of known errors, conscientious genealogies do not use statements made in this work without verification. It is often useful reference work for those who know how to employ it properly and who do not trust its statements too implicitly. And there's an asterisk. A reprint of the 7 volumes said, as originally published in 1925 to 1942, has been announced by the Genealogical Publishing Company of Baltimore. In 1928, Mr. Frederick Adams Verkus, publisher of the compendium, organized the Institute of American Genealogy. Mr. Verkus has himself the director of this organization and, in fact, sole arbitrator of its policies, for the council, which was formed at his invitation, was merely advisory. The Institute inaugurated ambitious programs, into the details of which we need not enter here. Despite its pretentiousness, it seems fair for several reasons to include it in our account of commercial houses. It ultimately went out of business. In the foregoing discussion of commercial firms, it has not been our intention to criticize those which conducted a legitimate business. It is only when they have made a false pretense of offering research facilities that they render themselves liable to criticism. Some years ago, such a case was brought to my notice. A woman had signed a contract with a commercial firm which offered at a stated price to trace her ancestry and publish a book devoted to it. A relative became suspicious and started to research in original documentary sources. The book, meanwhile, was published containing many notable lines, beautifully embellished with colorful coats of arms, which her relative could prove were not in her ancestry at all, and a lawsuit resulted. In their legitimate field of commercial houses perform a very useful service. An example is the Genealogical Publishing Company of Baltimore, which in recent years has reprinted by offset many genealogical reference books, including ship passenger lists, abstracts of wills, marriage licenses, court records, compendium genealogies, and so on, which have been long out of print and thus made them available to such libraries and individuals who as desire to obtain copies. Its affiliate firms, the Heraldic Book Company and the Regional Publishing Company, have reprinted reference books on heraldry and local state history. This publishing company has in some instances obtained copies for reproduction which contain some corrections and additions as marginalia. In others, they have incorporated published material later as such additions and corrections from genealogical periodicals and other sources. Where necessary and economical, they have added indexes to books. They have also published offprints of records in genealogical and historical periodicals and in the printed state archives. Generally speaking, the work done by commercial houses does not conflict with that done by professional genealogists. Clients of the former desire coats of arms or illustrious ancestry, at least the shadow of illustrious ancestry, or they have satisfied to accept what is found in print. Clients of the latter desire to ascertain the truth, lead where it may, and are willing to finance a scholarly investigation based on the original documentary evidence in order to unearth genuine historical fact. Both classes of client pay for what they get, and both get what they pay for. And it ends with a quote. It is a pity that so little research is done from first sources and information produced which is dependable. So many of the present acting genealogical bureaus are merely compendiums of already published material. They expend vast sums in the work, but they produce not a single new fact and do not even correct the material submitted. It is enough to make a real honest-to-goodness genealogist throw a fit. WBB in the Boston Transcript, September 17, 1930. And this ends our reading of Chapter 9, Commercial Firms. This has been Craig. This has been Just Genealogy. Next time, we'll be talking about Chapter 10, The Client. Thank you all so very much, and I will see you soon.